So MMA or boxing? I think to answer the question, I still do think boxing is bigger between the two. But obviously in this video, I'm going to get into why I think that and why UFC has actually been, gaining so much traction and where I think that boxing can improve. Now, I think UFC over the last few years has just, its growth has just been so exponential. I think with the rise of guys like Conor McGregor, he brought so much attention to the sport. Guys like, Khabib Nurmagomedov and Anderson Silva and guys like this. But for me, I really started to take note of UFC when it was Conor McGregor. And really since then, I think we've seen so many stars in the sport and it's really in a healthy place. Now, I think the reason I actually have friends on both sides. I've got friends that are the hardcore boxing fans. And then I've also got friends and family members that are more of the casual side. And now hearing from the casual side, I think where people are picking up UFC and they're really having an issue with boxing is two main things. I think number one with boxing, and it's been a big issue for many years now, is the fact that we don't get the fights that we want when we want them. One of the biggest fights of all time, Floyd Mayweather against Manny Pacquiao. We had to wait years for that fight. The negotiations were public. We had to hear reason after reason as to why the fight didn't happen. And after 5-6 years, you almost say to yourself, you almost lose interest. Compare that to UFC on the other hand. When Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov were really going at it and that incident happened between the two, Dana White immediately said, this fight's got to happen. Obviously, Conor McGregor had his legal issues, but you just knew that was the one fight to make and you knew it was going to get made. They didn't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years for it to happen. Another example, the biggest fight now that's being talked about is obviously John Jones against Tom Aspinall. Dana White has already said it's a fight that has to happen. Everyone's talking about it. And Dana White, you already know it. He's going to do everything in his power to make that fight happen. So I think that's the big thing. I think for casuals, that are just looking at boxing, they're saying to themselves, even, Crawford against Spence, we had to wait for it. Deontay Wilder against Anthony Joshua. How big would that fight have been if those guys, there was a time when they were both undefeated, both in their prime, a heavyweight champion from England that's selling out arenas, a heavyweight champion from America that talks well, brash, knocking everyone out, all knockouts on his record. How big of a fight would that have been? We never got that. We still haven't got Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua. In America, we're still not getting Canelo against Benavidez, Gervonta Davis against Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez. We're not getting these fights. So I think that's one of the big reasons why UFC is really bridging that gap, because that's something that they really understand. Now, I think boxing obviously is getting a little bit better, especially with Turki Al-Sheikh coming into the sport, and we are seeing some very good cards. But I still think that is something where boxing does need to improve. Now, the second thing I hear, especially when I speak to some of my family members and friends that are casuals, is the judges. Okay, so that's another one. So obviously, over the previous weekend, it was Mike Tyson against Jake Paul. And on the undercard, it was Serrano against Taylor. Now, a lot of people are looking at that fight and saying to themselves, okay, well, we felt like Serrano won it. They're looking at many other fights as well. Lomachenko against Haney. I'm not talking about fights that are close. I'm talking about fights that 90% of people think that a certain person won that fight. And the judges are giving it the other way. What really happens in UFC is it's pretty unanimous. Even when a fight is 3-2 or pretty close, the right guy for the most part is normally getting his hand raised. And I think that's a big thing. I think we've just got so many decisions over the years. You can think of some of the big robberies, Golovkin against Canelo, Kovalev against Andre Ward. So I think a lot of casuals look at that and say to themselves, you know what? I'm kind of done with boxing. I remember myself after the Haney Lomachenko fight. I was sick of boxing after that. And I think that's where boxing really struggles. So I think those two aspects really are where UFC is, I still think boxing is the bigger sport, but that's where I think UFC is closing the gap because number one, everyone fights everyone. Number two, they fight when you want to see them. And then obviously number three, you're not getting all that controversy with the judges. I'll give you another example. Let's say it's a big name fighter. He's fighting against, relatively unknown opponent, but it's the big name fighter and he's got the promotional company. You already know if it's a somewhat of a close fight, they're going to give that favorite the decision. And I think, that's a big turnoff for people that are casuals is that, they're turning on boxing for the first time and that's what they're seeing. They're also turning on boxing for the first time and seeing Jake Paul against Mike Tyson. They're saying to themselves, is this really what boxing is? I haven't watched boxing in 4 or 5 years. Is this what it's about? A 60-year-old, fighting against a YouTuber. Is this what boxing is? So look, obviously, I am a little bit biased. I'm more of the boxing fan. But I do think, both sports really are thriving in 2024. And I think that's a good thing. I think we're getting outstanding fights. I think boxing is improving, especially with Saudi, getting into the mix. But yeah, just wanted to make a quick video. I think it's something that needed to get talked about. I know a lot of people are fans of one or the other, or, in my case, if there's a big UFC fight they watch, if there's a big boxing fight they watch. But yeah, it's always an interesting conversation, and especially with the rise of UFC. I don't think it's quite where boxing is, but I do think that the rise of UFC has been very impressive.